Welcome to Conversations with Go On Girl Book Club, a discussion series about authors and their recently published literary works. This episode is in partnership with Audible. Go On Girl is a national book club that celebrates, perpetuates, curates, and preserves the gift of reading, of human expression using words, the art of Black literature. Across 3 decades, our mission has been to celebrate the legacy of Black literature, foster a sisterhood rooted in the love for literature, and encourage the development of literary talent. We are 48 chapters in 18 states and 38 cities with nearly 400 members. Please check us out at our website, goongirl.org. I am Vivian Phillips' husband, the interim president of Go On Girl, and this evening we are so pleased to be in conversation with Imani Perry about her novel, A Dangerously High Threshold for Pain, an Audible original narrated by Imani Perry. Our moderator for this episode of Conversations with Go On Girl is Renee Washington from our Alabama 1 chapter. Renee, shall we get started?
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you. Let me introduce our author for the evening. Imani Perry is the Hughes Rogers Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University and a faculty associate with Gender and Sexuality Studies and Jazz Studies. In the summer of 2023, she will join the faculty at Harvard University as a Radcliffe Professor. Perry is also a contributing writer for The Atlantic. Perry is the author of 7 books, most recently South to America, A Journey Below, the Mason-Dixon to Understand the Soul of a Nation from Echo Books 2022, which received the 2022 National Book Author Award for Nonfiction and was an instant New York Times bestseller and an indie bestseller. South to America was named one of President Obama's favorite books of 2022, as well as numerous end-of-year best of lists. She is a scholar of law, literary, and cultural studies, and an author of creative nonfiction. She earned her PhD in American Studies from Harvard University, a JD from Harvard Law School, and an LLM from Georgetown University Law Center, and a BA from Yale College in Literature and American Studies. Her writing and scholarship primarily focus on the history of Black thought, art, and imagination. She seeks to understand the processes of retrenchment after moments of social progress and how freedom dreams are nevertheless sustained. And we are so excited to talk with her this evening about her Audible, A Dangerously High Threshold for Pain, about her ongoing struggle with autoimmune conditions. Welcome, Dr. Imani Perry.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, yes. Let me go ahead and just get the gushing out of the way. You are incredible, and you are self-described as an artist with words, and that is the truth.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. I heard you say in an interview that in the book South to America, you brought a library with you. Mm-hmm. And that was the experience that I had just going through your Instagram page.
And
get through it. I kept starting, I want to read that book. And I had to read this excerpt. You bring a library with you wherever you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, because I do love books, and I love to give shine to books that shape me. So
yes, very much appreciated. So before we dig into and delve into the Audible, I did want to ask you if there is an interview question that you particularly disliked being asked.
Oh, Well, one, which is funny because I already told you I didn't have a lot of sleep last night, but I
Yeah.
can't stand when people ask me, do you ever sleep? You work so much. Do you ever sleep? And, I do try to, I, because I don't know how to answer that, but
Yeah. Yeah.
ask me.
Yeah. Okay. And is there a comment in particular about your health that makes you cringe?
Oh, no. I mean, I guess when nobody likes when people say, "Oh, you look bad," or "You look tired." You don't look, that is feels. I
Rude.
understand where it's coming from. It comes from concern, but you
Mhm.
might have been so self-conscious about the way that the surface changes with illness that it kind of exacerbates that self-consciousness often.
Yeah, understandable. Okay. Well, I did want to share a quote from your intro. I had to make myself not just quote everything. I just highly, highly encourage everyone listening. If you have not already, you need to listen to this Audible. Let me start with the quote from the intro. It takes enormous courage and trust to allow yourself to remember, which you quote, from the body keeps the score. And then you go on to say, since 1996, I've been aware of my condition. It became plural, conditions. To know oneself as a person who lives with chronic diseases, however, is not the same as having reflected upon that living. It is a flood. There are traumatic events. They range from relatively small things to more significant near-death or permanently disabling experiences. There is a tendency to try to move past them and quickly get to better, but in doing so, it is easy to forget that the diseases must be grappled with, both for ourselves individually and because in living with disease, we bear witness to something important about the human condition, something that is worth the world's attention. If you have a chronic disease, you also have a testimony to offer the people in your midst and those beyond. I want to thank you, Dr. Perry, for bearing witness and then ask you, even though you clearly lay out the why of your sharing your testimony, did you struggle in convincing yourself to do it? And if so, what would have been your case to remain silent?
Oh, so this is a great question. So I didn't struggle at this point. I'd thought about writing about living with chronic diseases in the past. I had, okay, so there's two different parts. So one is when I was younger, when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I was not, as it were, totally out with my diseases, especially at work. And I had this experience reading this writer who's a disability studies activist, Mia Mingus, talking about disability. And I realized, I was like, oh, I have chronic disability. I hadn't thought about myself in terms of disability prior. And then as I sort of developed professionally, I was thinking, I talked more about it because, there are people for whom it's not safe.
Mhm.
And there are so many of us who live with these illnesses or live with various disabilities for whom it's not safe to come forward, but who need to have sort of a voice out in the world. And then on top of it, when COVID happened, and I started to read about long COVID, and I got very emotional. And I was crying a lot. And I realized it was because I was imagining all the people who were now living with the kind of conditions that I lived with, because so many of the symptoms are like autoimmune conditions. And I thought, I really do need to share some of what I learned. And so much of what I learned was a much less tidy story than I thought when I first thought I had mastered having
Mhm.
illnesses. And I was like, well, that too, because people make you feel like if you have illnesses or you have disabilities, like the thing is to master it and have a perfect life, even though, I realized how damaging that idea was to myself, even when I imposed it on myself. So I felt, oh, no, I really have to say something about it. That said, it's scary. I mean, the day that the excerpt was out in the New York Times was a really hard day for me. It's
Ah,
not easy, and it's not easy because people treat you differently and they're intrusive, but it felt as though it was worth it. It was important work to share. So I just sort of moved through the discomfort, you know.
yeah, absolutely. And I, when I was asked to do this interview with you, I, they didn't know that I deal with chronic pain. Our journeys are completely different, but I connected to so much
Yeah.
that you shared. And yes, that wanting to present, because like you said, it can be invisible. People don't necessarily just look at you and see that you're going through something. And so then when you share that you are, yes, there's many layers of what the kind of responses that you can receive. Will you share with the audience the specific conditions that you are living with?
So I have systemic lupus, which is mostly under control. I have Graves' disease, which I've sort of had a long journey, and it's never been completely under control. I am in and out of periods where I have copper toxicity, and I have chronic migraines. So, but the big conditions are the two autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, and speaking of autoimmune conditions, I have read that particularly when you talk about lupus and other autoimmune conditions, and even conditions like high blood pressure, and there are other
Oh, I
that
have
they.
that too. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay, yes. Listen, I I have a girlfriend circle, and they range from small to heavier, but most of our circle has high blood pressure, and we are all Black women. And so looking at autoimmune conditions that they impact us at a much higher rate. And in listening to your Audible, uh you talk, first let me ask you this first. The title, A Dangerously High Threshold for Pain, which is such a powerful title, and the story behind it made me, oh my gosh. Will you share with the audience the story behind the title?
Sure. So I wound up, I'm going to try to abbreviate it a little bit, but I was I was in the hospital. I had gone to the hospital. I was at work. Let me start. Okay, I'll start building. I was at work. I was feeling sort of out of it. I was going about my life. I picked my children up for school. There was a sign that something wasn't right, but I wasn't processing it intellectually. And the sign was that I picked up my younger child and I laid down in the sandbox, and I was dressed for work. And I'd laid down and I still wasn't processing what was going on. I go home and I'm sort of fixing dinner and stuff. And I realized that I couldn't pee. Sorry for that graphic.
No.
But to tell you the process in my head, so I called my friend to come get my children. I was like, can you come see about the kids? And I walked to the hospital. And I went to the hospital and I was in the ER, and I had at this, so I had a very large kidney stone. It created a blockage. I was septic. And and I was not in pain. And the people at there was a urologist. Anyway, so it was a problem. I wound up in the hospital for a week. I didn't want my kids to come see me because I had all of these wires coming out of my body. And the urologist said to me, anytime you feel anything wrong, you have to go to the hospital because you have a dangerously high threshold for pain. And, pain is acute. And there's so much in particular about, I think, Black women.
Yes.
And the way we're socialized to swallow pain, to swallow discomfort, and the pressures that we put on ourselves to sustain that we actually participate in heaping on the wound, the cruelty of the world places on ourselves. Because clearly it had to hurt, but I was so used to pushing it down that I got to the point where I wasn't even feeling it. I was just on autopilot. And so, unfortunately, that wasn't my last time with a hospitalization because I waited too long. But having sepsis, I mean, it's this realization. I thought I was doing the right thing. I actually
Mm,
made my children vulnerable too, because
yes, yeah.
blood infection can take you out.
Yes, yes, yes. And so, oh yeah, there's just so much in that. And it's so true that I do believe that Black women in particular, even with what I'm dealing with, I just realized within the past year that I had just accepted being told something, and pain is just a part of my life. And I just had to realize, no, you should just accept this. You need to, so yeah, I'm in the process. I'm in that elimination process. Oh, it's not this, it's not this. And this is what we go through. And do you feel that um as a Black woman, you've been taken less seriously? I know that you did eventually get to, you were put in the care of a wonderful doctor. So grateful for that for you. But along the way.
I've had Along the way, I've had terrible experiences. I've even had bad experiences recently, because the reality is that, I have some wonderful doctors, but depending upon what's going on, you have to see different specialists. You have to, you wind up in the emergency room. Your doctor's not on, is on vacation, those kind of things. And the assumption that if you're in pain, that you're engaged in drug seeking behavior,
Mm,
the disregard, the not doing appropriate testing. There was one time I was in the ER and I actually had an infection. This was in an ER in Chicago. And I was there for hours, and then the doctor said, well, you're fine because you don't have a fever. And I said, no one took my temperature. What do you mean I don't have and as it turns out, I did have a fever and I had a bad infection. I had been there for hours, right? And in the midst of it, I'm witnessing what's going on in the ER. It's full of Black folks. And everybody sort of was being neglected. It was just heartbreaking. And so even in that context, it's like it was a window. My own experience of being diminished was there, but it also was a reminder for me that it's important to talk about the sort of larger structural issues, because for many of us, there's not the opportunity to speak out publicly about all of the neglect that we experience.
absolutely, absolutely. And I when you shared about being told when you were being treated one time, oh, you just have an ingrown pubic hair.
Yeah, pubic
I,
hair.
what?
Excruciating pain. Yeah. It was so humiliating. It's like, because it's so racialized.
Yes.
And I just was like, gosh, yeah. And also that physician lied and said I had a positive test when I did. Yeah. Yeah.
And then being laughed at by another doctor.
Yeah. I've been yelled at by doctors. There was one I waited for hours, and he sent in a medical student, and I said, I've come to see a specialist. I didn't come to see. It's fine for the medical student to be here.
Right.
Raised his voice, and I was just, it's now there are wonderful people in the medical profession, and so I don't want to suggest that, but there's something about there's moments when there are people who would, for whatever reason, cannot don't have self-control and cannot self-regulate appropriately, that I think has everything to do with who they see in front of them. There's something that doesn't, that doesn't go off about, this is actually unprofessional behavior. This is also behavior that puts this person at risk. Yeah.
Yes. And when you talked about the self-protective value of inscrutability when it comes to our own vulnerability, that is such a just so on point with how we feel that we have to move through this world.
You don't want people to see, if the world is cruel, you don't want to, it's sort of the thing, like when people say, well, don't let them see you cry. wait till you get in your car, get home. It's a sort of because the realization that so often vulnerability, if people are not empathetic, your vulnerability can make you even more vulnerable. Then it becomes circular.
Yes.
Because oh, she's okay, right? I mean, so it's a difficult dynamic.
Yeah. Because I mean, we are strong, but then there's that, that trope of the strong Black woman, even that Black don't crack. I mean,
Yeah.
Black does crack. We do crack.
Maybe not on the surface, but definitely.
Right. Right. So it's that balancing act of, yes, we want to, we want to be in strength. We want to be resilient. And at the same time, we want to be seen as that, oh, yes, we can break, we need care, we need to be allowed to be vulnerable. And so that's why I think that your doing this Audible is just so important. And as I was listening to it, I also wondered, though, as I was listening to you share story after story, you have a beautiful voice, for reading. But there was a calmness. You were just so calm in sharing your story. And there were, like I said, there were points when I just gasped, where I go, what? But you were just how were you able to do that?
So, I think so it's so interesting. I've done 2 audiobooks before. I did Breathe, which is my book that was a letter to my sons.
Yes.
And I did South to America, the audiobook, which is a 16+ hour audiobook. And I cried a lot. I mean, my voice cracks in both of those. And so I think there was something about the emotion of doing those that actually, like, those testimonies of home and love actually allowed this one to feel smoother. I think it's, sort of like, because I was just about to say, I really resonated when you said we are strong, and it's like the goal is to be strong and healthy and centered and sort of spiritually sound. And so there's something about the process of those other testimonials that I think actually made my voice stronger with this one.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost soothing, even though some of the things you were sharing were not soothing experiences by a long shot. So, yes. Okay. So I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, where you were born, and you are a daughter of the South. And so you know what we say down here, who your people, who raised you. So tell us about that. And if you would tell us through the lens of the story of the shirts that you share.
Oh, is that I'm trying to remember which story I told about shirts.
Yeah, so yeah, your mom in particular, but then also about your father and your grandmother.
Yeah. So who are my people? I was born at University of Alabama, Birmingham Hospital. And my family has been in Birmingham since the 1938. So before that in Huntsville. And I talk about wearing, and my father who raised me is my adoptive father. He's a Jewish man from Brooklyn who came to Birmingham, met my mother. They were in a relationship. So I was about 12 years old. And he came to Birmingham because he was involved in the movement, wanted to do social justice work, worked at Holy Family High School, and both my parents worked at Miles College. Both of them work at both Miles and Holy Family. And one of the things I talk about is how their clothing actually comforts me. And there's a particular flannel shirt of my father's, and there's a blue and white striped shirt of my mother's. And with my Medea, it's her house coat. And so my younger son he says, I know when you're missing her because she put on her house coat. And there is something about that, the tactile thing of being nurtured. She would always, after I was diagnosed with lupus, I would stay at her house and I would wake up in a sweat because she would put an electric blanket on me when I was asleep to try and help my joints. To to be so loved is, you know, in that very particular way of it's in a very particular Black Southern way. It's a sort of deep protection and care that was cultivated in the wake of a violent racist society. It's just such an extraordinary gift, and it is something that for me is the greatest source of strength that I have. And also, you know, being in a family that's full of these diseases, because I do believe that part of it is actually, you know, I was born in 1972, and that year Birmingham was the most polluted city in the kingdom. We have all these autoimmune diseases. You know, it's just all the industries, all the regulation. I tell people and others, they say, you know, in Alabama, you don't have to have your car inspected. And my friend from Mississippi said, that can't be true.
It's true.
I know if somebody from Mississippi is saying,
I know, right?
No.
It's always this battle of who's at the bottom. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, yeah. So the shirts and the house coat to me represent a form of self-care. You know, what other forms of self-care do you engage in for yourself?
Okay, so there's a couple of things. I love this question. One is I listen to music every day. And I read every day. Those are things that are delightful to me. I try to laugh at once, you know, when my younger son had, you know, they would do those surveys, kids ask questions about their parents. And so I asked my younger son, he was, I don't know, maybe 8, you know, what's something your mother loves to do? And I thought he was going to say, write. And he said, laugh. And I laugh all the time. So I'm always looking for something to laugh at. And here's the other thing. And again, one of my friends laughed at me about this, but it's true. I love my own cooking. And I cook for things for myself that are healthy. I mean, I sometimes I'm cooking a separate meal for my children, but I like to prepare food for myself with lots of vegetables. I like to make these elaborate fruit salads in the morning. And so I try to combine the healthfulness with things that I really take pleasure in. You know, I don't like to just eat healthy for the sake of eating. I like
good. Yes. Yes.
To feel and like to just be, you know, oh, that was good, right?
Yeah. I love that. That is beautiful. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. And it's I had to laugh because while I was listening to the Audible, and you were talking about, you know, how, you know, the practice that you had to learn to engage in to keep yourself healthy, and, you know, your addiction to sugar, and as I was listening, I was eating a piece of chocolate cake and I dropped my fork and I said, she's right, I need to stop eating this sugar.
It's so hard.
It is hard.
She's probably like, okay, it's the thing, you can't do total deprivation.
Right. You cannot.
I can have a piece of cake or something.
Yeah. Yes. And so you mentioned your sons. How old are they now?
16 and 19.
Okay. Wow. And how do you think their world has been shaped, or their psyches have been shaped by living with a woman who moves through the world, you know, dealing with disability?
To be completely honest, I think it has produced anxiety for both of them. I think it's emotionally very difficult to have a parent and your primary caretaker be someone who's ill. And I've tried to be honest. It's so hard, but I've tried to be honest about that so that there's space for them to talk about it and acknowledge it. They're also extremely sensitive people. They are attentive to other human beings. They're kind. And so I think that's the other side of it. You know, they really, you know, they'll say, okay, are you okay? Like, are you, you know, and it's not just with me, it's with, so they have a tenderness that I think comes from that, but it's hard. It's just no way around it.
Yeah.
It's in pain, right? I mean, we just.
Yeah. And it's hard for you. So, yeah. So, and I know you have had other family members, as you referenced, that have dealt with chronic conditions. And do you feel like you were able to learn and glean anything from their journey that impacts your journey?
Oh gosh, that's the thing. My aunt Barbara, who had 2 kinds of lupus. I mean, I learned a lot from her. She's just unbelievable grace and dignity. I so wish that there had been better treatments when she was here. She lived. I mean, it was just, it was excruciating. And then I had a great aunt who died from lupus. It was before prednisone, which is now the thing that saves. I mean, you often feel with people, when you're someone with an autoimmune disease, you hate to have to go on steroids because they feel, but steroids have saved so many of our lives. And so, she's an example. So my auntie Bobby I remember her saying to me, it's going to be different for you. And it was so generous, but it just breaks my heart every time I think about how much harder the journey was for her. So yeah, it's also taught me gratitude.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna check to see if we have any questions, so I won't suck up all the questions. And we do. Okay, Dr. Perry, based on your experience, do you think that there is enough movement for improvement related to the overt disparities which continue in healthcare for Black people?
No, not at all. One of the things I often say, and I've written this in other texts, that knowledge without a moral imperative is totally insufficient. So people know. We've had celebrities talk about their experiences of medical racism. There's all the data, all the major newspapers, but knowing is not enough.
Right.
And it's just, and it actually is really upsetting that people know and there's still not enough movement, because then it begins to feel like absolute disregard. I think the thing that I try to talk about in the story, and that I think is really important for us to continue to try to do in community, is I really have tried very hard to take knowledge about my illness in my own hands, and to share what I know with people who have similar illnesses. I think we really do have to we have to still press for justice and care, but we also need to collectively share resources to learn, information, to tell each other about, what we're reading and what we're doing and all those sorts of things, and to build community. I think there's a lot of lessons in our history about the value of that. And I think, so often when you're most sick is when you're most alone, but that's when you most need other people.
So true. So true. So true.
Push through that.
Yeah. And, what your Audible did for me was, there's that balancing of, there's, I think I saw you say, it is what it is until it's not.
It ain't.
Yeah, right. And so that balancing of, I am trying to move through this as successfully as possible, yet at the same time, you bring a realistic view to it too. And so, you can get caught up in that. I have been one to, I don't want to speak it, because then that's like calling it into my life. But then if I don't talk about it, it's that it's a dance. Yeah.
I think that's right. And I think we have to, I think being realistic doesn't mean being defeated by it, but also not, like I once had a young woman who has some similar illnesses to me say, well, what do you do? How do you keep going when your hands are in a lot of pain? And I say, stop and not writing if my hands are in a lot of pain. That doesn't, and not even a strategy for still work. You should rest your hands if you. And I think that is a hard lesson. It's a lesson that there's moments when I have to learn it over again, but I think it's so important to actually care enough about yourself to understand that there's times when we just can't do it.
Absolutely. Yes. And so that leads me to the question about, which kind of connects back to the beginning when I asked you about the question you don't like, and you said, well, people act like I don't sleep, but yes, I do. But I looked up the word prolific, and
Yeah.
your picture was by the word prolific. So,
Yeah, I like.
yeah, so I am going to ask you, as we've noted, you've written, numerous books, and you write articles, you do a lot, and you're a lawyer, you're a professor, you're a mom, and for people who don't understand the ups and downs of chronic illness, particularly when it is not as visible as, you can look at someone and, how are you able to contribute, produce, and connect at the level that you do?
Thank you. I have figured out how to do things how to pursue my dreams in a way that allows space for my physical vulnerability. So what I mean is that writing actually for me is very calming, and it feels like it's a way I process things emotionally. I'm not, I'm the person who's in the house. Like people will I do not have fear of missing out.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be at home, right? And I think that it has meant I make decisions sometimes so I have long periods in my life where I don't really watch TV, not because I don't, but because you have to make choices about where your attention is paid.
Mm-hmm.
And TV sucks away sleep time a lot, right? I think in some way, like TV, the computer, the phone, and it impacts the quality of your rest. So it's like trying to I prioritize. So my children are first, right? And then family, and then I'm trying to figure out how to do things in my life that feel meaningful, right? And a lot of other stuff falls by the wayside that I probably would enjoy and that I'll get to when I'm not feeling like I have a lot of stuff to say.
Okay. I have some more questions. Let's see. Okay, we have a question. Dear Dr. Perry, thank you for sharing your story. I know of some of your writings, but did not know that you are being challenged by these autoimmune issues. I was diagnosed with lupus, SLE, at age 26 that led to surgeries, chemo, steroids, and now Benlysta. Am I saying that correctly? Autoimmune issues run on my paternal side. I am now 60. Prayer, humor, reading, Audible, and genealogy helped me deal with it. For years, I didn't mention it at work, but now that I am closer to retirement, I tell people. I have just downloaded your book on Audible and look forward to listening to it. All the best to you. And that's from Patricia Braxton.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah.
Yes. And I have another question from Professor Wendy Green. This is one of my besties. So. In what ways, if any, have your academic employers been accommodating or sensitive to your medical conditions? Have there been moments where you have had to advocate for yourself throughout your professional journey?
Yes. So let's see. I was really secretive. My first academic job, I was a law professor at Rutgers. I did not talk about my illness because I was afraid of discrimination. My colleagues at Princeton have been very supportive, at the departmental level and, accommodating in various ways. I have had issues though. So the most difficult one was over parking. And I had a parking space that was at a period where I was having very bad arthritis in my legs, especially in winter. And they put me in a parking lot that was really too far for me to walk for a long, and it was a battle. And I lost. And they wouldn't move my parking space. And it got
Is it because they couldn't see that you needed it? Is that what would have been?
Here's what they said. So I had a letter from my physician. They said that was not sufficient, that I had to be certified as disabled by the state of New Jersey. I've never lived in New Jersey. So I live in Pennsylvania. So it's also, that was a whole conversation. But it was it's one of those ways where you just like, oh, institutions are very ableist, and they have these architectures in place that are ableist often. And you think about, we have an older faculty. So there are physical limitations. I'm not unique. And so, and it's interesting because what I started to do with my kids when they were very young, because of it, is I would say to them, wherever we went, I would say, let's look around at this space. Who can't get into this space? Like, who can't, like, so if it's train stations, it's like, how would somebody who, uses a cane try to get in this space? Is there a way for a person with a wheelchair to get out? Just because I was like, part of it is that people just don't think about spaces as having barriers to access, right? And there's so many, I was like, maybe playing a role in the next generation, thinking about so much of space is exclusionary. Same thing with museums. Like I would say, who can't get enough money to come in? Who can't, to think about being exclusive and shutting people out. So even though I face my own challenges, I'm always trying to think, okay, how do we become part of people thinking differently about this, right? So
yes. I've been in some subway, and I was like, what do people who really cannot walk? Well, they have elevators, but I would not get on I would be terrified, like murder central. That's what I think about.
Filthy and have a
yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of them don't have working elements,
Yes. Oh, yes. So, in America, as we know, which is a very violent country, we speak a lot in terms of things being battles, and we fight disease. And I love your perspective on it. You see it a little differently when you talked about being inflamed versus being in battle. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, because I don't like to think, I really realize I don't like to think of myself at odds with my body. And it is my body that is inflamed. I'm not fighting against myself. I'm trying to calm myself. I'm trying to soothe the inflammation. I'm trying to be tender with myself. And so I really wanted to get away from that metaphor because, inadvertently, it was a way of talking about myself as though I was my own enemy. And we shame disease so much. I mean, one of the worst things is, and that was actually the worst thing over the last couple of weeks, publishing an article, the number of people said, oh, well, you actually should be doing this, so you should see this doctor, as though I have not spent over 25 years of my life working on figuring this out. Right? But it's also like, the problem is you haven't studied enough. You don't know the right. And so you don't want to pile on the shame. People think of healthfulness as a virtue.
Yes.
That means you're a good person. And the reality is, illness is not a measure of whether you're a good person or you're virtuous. And, it just strikes, well, first of all, it strikes everybody at some point. But it's not, especially with all the environmental stuff and the stressors, you can't, eat perfectly and exercise your way out of it. That's not how it works.
Yes, so true. Okay, I have another question from the chat. This is from, I think it's Lenadria Porter. Hello, Dr. Perry. Thank you for your books and for the Audible. Who are the voices, writers, thinkers, artists, etc., that inspire you and keep you going in the face of adversity? And that was going to be my question too. So perfect. Thank you.
I would say, so whenever when I have the hardest times in my life, I reread Toni Morrison's novels. Sonia Sanchez's poems also are really good. There's a book, what is it called? Is it On Illness by Susan Sontag? And then, what is it? Is it Invisible Kingdom? That's not the name, but Virginia Woolf, she uses a metaphor.
And you mentioned Audre Lorde.
Audre Lorde.
Yes.
Cancer journals. But you know, it's even just reading, and like, because one of the things that I talk about and that I think is really important for me was through illness, especially with my first major flare, is to develop a sense of myself that it's sort of at a spiritual level, but a sense of self that I felt was alive even when my body was very fragile. And so, and you know, some of it is you know, at the level of religious spirituality, but it's also just to sort of accessing parts of myself, my imagination, my sense of beauty that I can get to even when I can't move around a lot. It's super, super important, you know.
Yes. Okay, we have another question from Mavis Johnson. Hi, Dr. Perry. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I am a 50-something woman with cerebral palsy, and it has only been in the last 10 years that I have publicly embraced this part of my identity. Thank you so much for encouraging us not to be at war with our bodies. What do you suggest that we do to enhance that on a daily basis? Thanks, Mavis. Also one of my friends.
That's wonderful. It's so funny because I have a niece who has CP, and she wrote this gorgeous essay about it and posted it on Facebook. She's a cousin, you know, but like I call her niece because she's a baby, you know, she's like 20 years old. And there was, and I you know, I just keep writing, because there was something, she talked about it in a way that she wouldn't have ever told us directly, but in the writing, the testimony she gave about the challenge of her life, but also, you know, her own complexity, right? And the way, like, you know, because there's also a way that people put you in a box, like you know, they put you in the disability box.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, there are people who every time I say, how are you feeling? Right. And I'm like, if you don't, you know, and so I do think for me, writing is one of those ways, like not even just publicly, but like getting the feelings out, having a few trusted people with whom you can process those things on a regular basis, moving unselfconsciously, right? So like, you know, whether it's dance in a way that it doesn't have to be around anybody else, but actually like allowing yourself to feel grateful for the body that you're in, and not looking from the outside in, you know, not the judgment self, but like the self that, like, you know, I stretch every morning because it feels so good. I'm not even like trying to be like healthy. It just feels good to try.
You know? Oh, yes, love that. Okay, Valerie Jones has a comment. Words really have power. Changing perspective is key. Also, I'm quick to change caregivers if they refuse to partner with me in my health journey. Many people in our community don't do this. Great sharing. So yeah, thank you, Valerie. And you mentioned a few trusted people, and that was one of the things that you talked about in the book, is being very intentional about who you connect to. And it can't just be people, like you said, they're just like, oh, how you're doing. You know, these people have to be really on board with meeting you where you are. So yeah,
I think it's really important. And I will say that I also have tried to come to terms with and talk about my habits of retreating from people.
Yes, disappearing. You talk about disappearing. Yes.
It has to do with shame around illness. And so or not trusting people, even at times when people have completely been trustworthy, but I just, we have to do the work internally of being like, I'm okay. Like that doesn't get outsourced. Other people are not going to make you feel okay if you're not saying to yourself, I'm okay, like I'm good enough.
Yes. And so that, yeah. So, I'm a life coach, and I coach women through midlife transition. And one of the questions that I ask them is, who are you without role or title? And so I want to tweak that a little bit for you, Dr. Perry, and ask you, who are you without role, title, or conditions?
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a great question. I am someone who loves art, who loves beauty, who loves beaches, who laughs a lot, who's very affectionate, and who is always super hungry to know and discover. And but that's something I'm very aware of who I am without those things, because I think in some ways that's the gift of the diseases. I had to say to myself, all these plans may not work out. And I asked, how do I have a good life if none of the things that I'm trying to do work out? And I try to tap into the things that bring me joy, and that I feel, and if you tap into the things that bring you joy, you actually connect with other human beings, and then you become a better friend and a kind of, because I even try to think, the not role, because it's so easy to be like, I care for people this way, I do that. Those things are important, but that's not the sum total.
Yes. And I love it. I was trying to find, because I had that written down. When you talk about what would you do if you could, because you had it planned out. You wanted to be a lawyer, you wanted to be a professor, you wanted to write, you wanted to do all these things. What if none of that happened? Your response to that was so powerful. Oh my gosh. So I don't know what I did with it. I had it here. I was going to quote it, but I'm just telling y'all, it's worth the Audible just for her to say that. Just to hear her talk about that. Oh my gosh. It made me just tear up. It is just so beautiful, because basically you're talking about that I still matter. Just for existing, I matter.
Yes. And it's so easy. We can say that to other people so much easier than we can say it to ourselves, right? Like, I mean, the things I most admire in other human beings are not accomplishments. Why would I put that on my?
Yes. And you also talk about that what's most important is relationship versus accomplishments. That this is what's powerful about being connected in this world, is to connect to each other. And that when you talk about to be a little pushy with people that you love, if they try to disappear on you, that you need to keep pushing.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we have another question. This is from B.R. Harris. Thank you, Dr. Perry, for shedding light on this much needed conversation. I would strongly suggest to the audience that you should never, ever go to the hospital emergency department alone. I know this isn't always possible, but this is really important. Also, you should keep an updated list of your medications on you at all times. Medical alert necklaces and/or bracelets are important when you aren't able to speak for yourself. Also, try to keep a portable phone charger fully charged on you at all times. They come smaller now. This way you can charge your phone to contact a significant other if you need to go to the hospital. And she goes on to say, we should review the hospitals in our areas, and so that that you can go to the hospital of your choice if you are doing self-transport. And always keep a book, embroidery, knitting, or drawing project on you, so you have something to pass the time while waiting for your labs to come back. I hope this helps.
Good advice. And I'll just say, I was just caught in a storm in Tennessee recently, and my phone, I will never go anywhere without a portable phone charger.
Mm.
The power went out at the airport, the phone died, and I was in pain.
Oh, wow.
And so I think, I mean, that is really, really good advice.
Yes, yes. Okay. So you talked a little bit about what brings you fun and joy. So let me also get in your business. Are you still open to romantic love? Are you in? Yeah.
Interesting question. I mean, I sort of made the decision, yes, at some point, but I also sort of made the decision while I'm still actively, I'm divorced, while I'm
Yes.
raising my children. I, you know, men are a lot of work.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, they are. This is true.
And so, I think more in terms of wanting to, the next stage of my life, have companionship. It doesn't have to be sort of conventional partnership, doesn't have to be marriage, but like, partner to travel with and to have and I have cultivated a sort of community of people, of friends, people, in addition to family, who I feel like I'm an active, I have like, I don't feel lonely.
Mm-hmm.
So so romantic relationship is something that I would be open to when I have an empty nest in about a year or so. But it doesn't feel like an absence. And it's really, really important to me to not, that it has to be an affirming, positive, warm, meaningful relationship. I'm not interested in anything that takes away from my sense of self and joy.
Okay, so I think we have another question, and then I have a final question because I know you need some rest. So I'm not gonna, like I said, I could talk to you all night, but I'm not gonna do that. Oh no, this is just a comment. Amen. Men are a lot of work. Yes, they are. They are. This is true.
They're lovely.
They're lovely and a lot of work. Yes. More than one thing can be true.
Yes,
Okay. So your hope was, at the conclusion of your narration, upon making your story, and I'm quoting you, upon making your story an artifact, you would know something more about yourself, about the act of self-knowing, and how to keep telling stories that make your hands tremble and your heart race. What do you now know about yourself after having done this Audible, and what's the next story you're feeling led to share?
So I definitely know that I can make my way through the feeling of being terrified about releasing something into the world. That's a good thing to know.
Yes.
Because then it allows me to feel like I can continue to be courageous in different forms, so at some point I'm hoping I have some fiction come out. The next book is a book about Black people and the color blue. And the journey, it sort of like tells the story of how we became Black people, right? And as opposed to, these hundreds of different cultures of African people, but became Black people. But it tells the story through these relationships with the blue of the water and the sky and indigo and blues music and blue notes. And
I love that.
It's so much fun. And so I'm in the midst of writing it. And the nickname Blue, and it's because we so often, we don't get to tell the story in terms of the beauty, and so there's all the pain is there, but there's just there's so much beauty. And so it's a way to talk about Black and blue, not as just beating up, but Black and blue as a sort of,
I love that so much. And I am so excited that you're going to be writing fiction, because your nonfiction is so poetic, so lyrical. I know that you have a fiction book in you.
Thank you. I got
Yes, yes. Okay, I found the quote, so I'm going to end with this. And this was Dr. Perry's response to what if nothing that she wanted to worked out. I will make blankets. I will make origami flower bouquets and write short poems. I will drink tea with people and make them laugh. I will be a good friend who gives good hugs. I talked to myself until I understood that I could be myself without my goals. That the goal of bringing meaning and joy to life does not have to be rendered in specific ways. And that's what I most wanted, a meaningful life. And if I dared, a joyful one. I'm just, oh, I love that. That's just so, I love that so much. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been such a joy.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes. So I want to say thank you for sharing this time with us, Dr. Perry. Thank you for doing this Audible. Thank you for writing all of the books that you've written, every article. And I just encourage everyone to do a deep dive in Dr. Imani Perry. So thank you everyone for joining us to listen. And if you want to find out more about Go On Girl, you can go to goongirl.org. And we are the premier Black book club in the Americas. Thank you. You are a joy.
Hope I see you and get to hug your neck in Birmingham.
Yes, that's going to happen. That is going to happen. Bye-bye.